You are a system that's designed to produce value. And I want to break down a bit of what I mean by that. So I love this idea of systems thinking. And basically a system is various things that work together as a whole, right, to fulfill a specific outcome. Various things that work together as a whole to produce a certain outcome, right? And I'm talking about this idea of you and I are systems that are designed for the purpose of giving value to the world. That there are various components which, when they work together, they are then designed to give value to the world. Now, how do systems work? If you think about a car, I love using this illustration of a car. A car is intended to get you from point A to point B. That's the intended aim of the car, ultimately. And if it doesn't get you from point A to point B, even if the sound system is great, even if the car is beautiful, even if the rims are nice, if it can't get you from point A to point B, it's not valuable to you, right? It's not fulfilling a specific value that it has, right? So that car, it's got that value, it's got that purpose that it has to fulfill. On top of that, that car is a bunch of things that are coming together in order to carry out that purpose. So the car has the engine, the car has the wheels and tires, the car has, the metal parts, it has windows, it has doors, it has all of those things that come together and are designed to get you from point A to point B, right? Ultimately, all those things working together form a system, right? They come together to create this thing that must get you from point A to point B. So there's the outcome, the intended aim, and there's all these things working together to fulfill that certain aim, right? So that's the system. But how the system works, right? How the car works is that there are inputs that must be put into the car to make it work. Right? There are inputs that must be put into the car to make it work. So those inputs are the fuel, those inputs are, the battery, those inputs are, the things that are put into the car, the water, so that when it's put into the car then processes those things and produces the output of moving, right, of going from point A to point B. And usually that's how systems work. There's an input, there's a process, and there's an output. And the input, process, and output are essential for the system to actually work, right? So there's the intended aim of the system, there's the fact that it's made up of various parts that come together, and then there's the input and process and output of the system. You and I are systems which are created for the purpose of giving value. And one of the purposes that we have is to give value to the world. That our intended aim and what fulfills us is when we serve and benefit something to the world, right? There's something that can be gained out of you, that there's something valuable that's in me and in you. And because of that, there are various parts of us that come together to make up that whole, that system. There's our talents, our voice, our abilities, our knowledge, our skills, our background, the things that make you uniquely you, that when they come together, they can help you and I in giving value to the world. They can benefit someone else. But for that to work, it requires input, process, and output. And I hope you'll follow me with this, that the inputs inform the outputs. So if you take a car, back to the analogy, if you put petrol into the car, it will make sure that the car can perform the output of getting you from point A to point B. The input processes and then creates the output. If you and I were to decide one day to say, you know what, I think putting petrol in the car is not so great an idea. Let me put paraffin in the engine, right? Rather than putting petrol, let me just put in paraffin. In as much as it is an input, it's not a good input, right? Because it doesn't align with the car, it doesn't align with the function of this system. And so even though it is an input, because it's a bad input, that input will destroy the car and will make it not able to fulfill its intended outcome. And the point I'm trying to make with that illustration is the idea that for us to function properly in giving value to the world, there must be good inputs that come in so that they empower the outputs that enable us to give value to the world. So for example, if you have a specific career or a job that you want to pursue, whatever, you have to have the inputs of getting the education, of getting the knowledge, of getting the understanding, of reading the certain books, of studying the certain topics, so that you can be able to give the output of that value. So you study, whether it's marketing or education or whatever, you study and learn that information so that you can fulfill the output of being a teacher, of being a consultant, of being whatever, right? The input is essential for the output. And there's also the processing, right? And the processing is, I like that idea so much. It's the idea that you take the input and you internalize it, you make it yours. It almost like it becomes one with yourself, and you blend it with your unique personality, your unique knowledge, your unique analogies and examples and experiences. And when the output happens, the output is genuine, right? It's that this is my experience. I once had a teacher when I was in high school, one of my favorite maths teachers. And he made mathematics enjoyable because while he was teaching, he would teach mathematics, but also relay it with some of his own personal experiences to say that, this is how I experienced this and whatever, whatever. And you would understand the mathematical ideas, but it would be blended with his testimonies and his experiences, which made it memorable, right? I remember it because of the story aligned with it, that this guy, oh yeah, by the way, this was the story, and this was the funny part of it, etc. His processing of the knowledge, the mathematical knowledge, he processed it and made it internal and blended it with parts of himself that made it truly valuable to me as a student listening in this class. So he took the input, the information, the knowledge, the understanding, he processed it, he internalized it, he assimilated it and made it part of himself, and he output that in giving unique personal value that was beneficial to me and to my other colleagues and classmates as well. And the idea is that there is a value that you and I can give, right? And many of us don't even realize the potential value that we can give, whether it's in our work, in our businesses, in our ministries, etc. And that value is fueled by the inputs that we put in. So if you and I want to become better at something, there needs to be input of, getting the knowledge, getting the understanding, getting the training, getting the mentorship, getting, watching the good resources and material, taking it all in, right? The information that we need. Even if you are talented, there's inputs that you need in the area of, taking in the strategies, the approaches, etc. Inputs that empower the outputs. On top of the inputs, it's the processing, it's the daily practice, it's the time to understand and meditate on the things that you're inputting. It's like when you eating healthy foods, even that is an input. And the processing is how you digest it, how you internalize it, so that you can then have the energy to produce the output. Now, how do all of these ideas come together? How do all of these concepts blend together? It's firstly realizing that, first of all, you and I are value creators, and I'll unpack that a lot more as we continue. But you and I have the ability to benefit someone and something else, and for them to even reward you for the value that you give them, right? We have potential value to give, and I want to convince you of that reality, that we have potential value that we can give to the world in a large scale. And we have various parts of ourselves that come together to give that value, right? We have components and parts of ourselves, our personalities, our backgrounds, our relationships, our network, our experiences, etc. All of those components are valuable, like the parts of an engine, to give the value to the world. And that in order for us to fulfill that value, right, there's a way in which as a system we work, where it's input and process and output. Sometimes when we are failing at the output, right, when we're not seeing ourselves giving the value, when we're not seeing ourselves, I read a quote the other day, someone is saying, you don't make as much money as you want to make because you're not as good as you think you are. And it's a harsh concept when you think about it, but the point he was making is that the outputs of, whether it's money, whether it's, being where you want to be in life, the outputs is a consequence of the input and the processing. And his point is that you have not done the work of the input and the process well enough for you to achieve the output. And the point I'm trying to emphasize with that is that when we want certain outputs in life, we need to first of all be clear on what that output is, and then go back to unpacking what are the inputs that will feed into the output. What's the petrol that we need in order to fuel that? What's the specific water? What's the specific oil that we need, like a car, to fulfill that output? And don't just put any oil, they don't just put any petrol, you don't just put any type of water. But there's specific processes and the specific inputs that are connected to the output that we want to achieve in life. Even the life goals that we have, the relationship you want, the dream life that you want, the dream job that you want, what are the inputs that are necessary to produce that output? And then also, how are you processing that inputs? Someone once said, I've read all these books about, success and whatnot, but I don't feel like I'm achieving it. And there's a question on how are you processing it, right? Are you just reading, or are you taking time to apply, to internalize, to say, okay, what actions do I need to take in order to realize this? This is true even in our spiritual lives. You know, we read spiritual books, we internalize, we, input all this meaningful information, but we just read and run without taking time to internally process, to say, okay, which area of my life is this specifically hitting at? Which area of my life do I need to adjust or change or pivot in order to then realize the output or the value that I have an intended outcome with? I'll summarize this thought. There's so much more that could be said about it, but I want us to realize just two main thoughts, and I'm re-emphasizing it probably the third or fourth time now. You and I are value creators. There's someone who benefits from what you and I could give. And this happens because there are various parts of us which, when they work together, they can then produce that value. And for that to work, we need to input the right things, process those things, and aim for the specific outcome. And if you want to have a specific outcome in mind, and specific outputs that we have, specific goals and targets and value that we want to give, is to unpack, okay, this output that I have, what specific inputs do I need to put in? If it's to be a whatever it is, it may be a career goal, it may be a relationship goal, it may be a financial goal, it may be an educational goal, it may even be a personal goal, right? The value that we have to give. What are the inputs required for that, right? What books do you need to read? What resources do you have to acquire? What knowledge do you have to get? Who are the people you need to ask questions from? Input. And then there's the processing of that, right? To say, okay, how do I apply this in my life? What steps do I need to take to realize this in my own personal experience? How do I take this in and act on it so that it can actually become the output? Input, process, output. If we're not happy with the outputs, we need to ask ourselves, what are the inputs that we're taking in, and how are we processing those inputs so that we can realize the output? Hopefully that thought has been of some value to you. Hopefully it can serve as an input which you process and benefit you in the outputs that you want to achieve. All the best.